Studies show that consumption of refined sugars in excess can shape our behaviors much like nicotine, cocaine, caffeine, and alcohol do. In rat studies, it has been observed that even cocaine-addicted rats would rather get high on sugar than cocaine. Just knowing that sugar of the highly processed and refined variety is bad for your health is not enough to stop you from eating too much of it. You already know that sugar in excess is associated with a number of negative health outcomes, including type 2 diabetes, heart disease, some forms of cancer, and obesity. Nevertheless, it can be really hard to stop at just one cookie or one donut. Gaining control over your sugar intake just might come down to treating it like an addictive drug. But is it really fair to say that sugar is like a drug or similar to a drug? Is that hyperbolic? Let's take a look at what the data have to say. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the research on sugar addiction. Stay tuned until the end for 8 tips on how to best combat sugar addiction if you think that this is something that you're dealing with. Now, I've heard people say that sugar addiction is not real and that claims that sugar is like a drug are overblown. However, we do have scientific evidence that goes contrary to these claims. Research shows that sugar does in fact check all the boxes that indicate that a substance is addictive. This is in accordance with the criteria found in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, which is a big book that summarizes all of the things that are known to go awry with our human brains. Sugar has been associated with binging, craving, tolerance, withdrawal, cross-sensitization, cross-tolerance, cross-dependence, reward, and opioid effects. Studies show that consumption of refined sugars in excess can shape our behaviors much like nicotine, cocaine, caffeine, and alcohol do. In rat studies, it has been observed that even cocaine-addicted rats would rather get high on sugar than cocaine. Now, why is it that we can't seem to ever get enough of this white crystal? Sugar produces intense sensory pleasure. In simpler terms, it makes us feel good. Eating sugar makes us feel like everything is okay, even when that may not objectively be the case. It is not uncommon for people who are addicted to drugs or alcohol to go between those substances and sugar to get the satisfaction that they are looking for. For example, if you are trying to cut down on sugar, you may find yourself drinking more to compensate. This is because sugar, along with all of these substances, fit the same brain receptors and thus produce the same pleasurable effects. A dependence on sugar is basically a dependence on the opioids that your own body makes. Here are some examples of some opioid drugs, many of which I'm sure you've heard of. Your body makes opioids too, like beta endorphins. So when you overindulge in sugar, you basically get high on your own supply of opioids. While we all have the ability to get addicted to sugar, not all of us do. This is because of genetics, which makes each of us unique in terms of our preferences for sweetness and how we perceive sweetness. Continuing with the comparison between sugar and opioid drugs, sugar has been shown to produce withdrawal symptoms much like opioid drugs do. Naloxone is a life-saving drug that is given to people who have overdosed on opioids. It is an opiate antagonist, so it can produce symptoms of withdrawal. Animals who were given sugar and then given naloxone showed the same symptoms of withdrawal. Sugar withdrawal is not as easy to observe as withdrawal from known addictive drugs, but there are symptoms, including attention deficit, hyperactivity, and decreased performance. In the brain, a deficiency of dopamine can also be observed, and this can cause a person to feel depressed when trying to abstain from sugar. The fact that our brains reward us when we eat sugar is not anything sinister. It's actually a good thing, evolutionarily speaking. Sugar is the preferred source of energy for the brain, and it provides our bodies with quick energy. Humans basically evolved this reward system to make sure that we eat and stay alive. Back before we had constant access to sugary foods, this was a positive. We would eat sweet things when they were available and use the extra fat stored in our bodies to carry us through times of scarcity. Just like our ancestors, we are really good at storing fat in order to get through hard times. The problem is that we have sugar available to us everywhere. at the gas station, at the grocery store, at work, in the kitchen cabinet, and we're storing it with no time of scarcity in sight. I recognize that this statement is not true for many people who are living in countries where food scarcity is a very real issue. This research more so applies to the US and other wealthy countries where obesity is on the rise in both adults and children. Based on the research, we can say that yeah, sugar does have addictive properties, but you knew that already. That's why you clicked on this video, because you're looking for answers. So if you're dealing with sugar addiction, what are you supposed to do about it? I have 8 tips that may help. Tip number 1 is to be forgiving towards yourself. Maybe you look in the mirror and feel unhappy with what you look like. Or perhaps you feel ashamed for binging on sugar and feeling out of control. Try to leave all of those things in the past where they belong and forgive yourself. To be fair, your biology and years of evolution were working against you, so you really don't deserve to carry all that blame anyway. Tip number 2 is to avoid dieting. Any changes that you make to your diet need to be sustainable. So avoid fasting, cutting out entire food groups, skipping meals, doing anything that you know you will not be able to sustain for more than a week or a day. Tip number 3 is to practice eating balanced and satisfying meals. When you aren't eating enough protein, good fat, and fiber, you tend to fill up on carbs, and the more carbs you eat, the more cravings you have for sugar. One simple way to make sure that your portions are on point is to use what is known as the plate method. Basically, you take your plate, divide it into 2, and fill 1/2 of your plate with non-starchy vegetables. 1/4 of your plate is for your carbohydrates or starches, and the remaining quarter is for your protein. Tip number 4 is to practice mindful eating. Mindfulness is all about slowing down and paying attention to what your body is communicating to you moment to moment. This means eating slowly and noticing when you have had enough. You may be surprised to find that just one piece of candy eaten slowly can be enough to satisfy your desire for something sweet, as opposed to eating 10 candies quickly and mindlessly. Tip number 5 is to create a stress management routine. Many of us use sugar as a way to cope with difficult emotions, but it's like putting on a band-aid that just keeps falling off, yet we keep picking it up and putting it back on, hoping that it'll stay on, and it just never does. So you have to start thinking about what else you can do to deal with these difficult emotions. You might find it helpful to talk to a friend or talk to a therapist, go for a walk, do yoga, do some type of movement, or just do anything that lifts your spirits, makes you happy, that doesn't involve eating sugar. Tip number 6, and I say this with love, is to stop playing yourself. Don't lie to yourself. If you know you're one of those people that will eat the entire pint of ice cream, the entire bag of chips, the entire bag of cookies, the entire box of cereal, whatever it may be, don't tell yourself that this time is going to be different. It could be. Don't get me wrong, I'm all about being hopeful, but you also have to be realistic. If you know that it's hard for you to have those things in the house, don't bring them into the house. Do yourself that favor and leave them on the grocery store shelf. This can be difficult when you live with other people, but it might be worth it to have a conversation with them and see if they're willing to compromise. See if they're willing to work with you and help you along your journey. Tip number 7 is to make sure that you sleep well. When you're tired, you're more likely to make poor food choices, and it's very easy to reach for something sweet as a pick-me-up. So make sure that you get your 8 hours, plus or minus an hour, every night. And my final tip number 8, is to track your intake. Keeping track of what you eat on a daily basis is one of the best ways to modify your habits, because it's a way for you to see what you're actually consuming, and you might be surprised at what you find. You can use the Notes app on your phone, or even an app that is just for tracking sugar intake, or you could go pen and paper style and just write down everything that you eat, especially looking at the sugar and the grams of sugar that you're consuming, and see what you learn about yourself. You might realize that you tend to eat a lot more sugar during a certain time of the month, or it might be the case that certain things or people trigger you to overeat. You might also find too what leads you to success. On the days that you eat less sugar, what happens? Are you interacting with certain people or having certain experiences that make it easier for you to taper down your sugar intake? Basically, it's a way for you to learn about yourself and make changes that are personalized, that work for you. And that brings me to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Take care.